Okay, so we're going to start. This is not an ACLU meeting. This is a coffee Klatch where everybody here happens to be a member of the ACLU, but we do this every Saturday now since the pandemic. And today we're going to be talking about Dick, the anti-authoritarian rebel. And I came up with this anti-authoritarian rebel just as I was pulling the slides together. I mean, I always knew this about Dick, but it really became more and more clear as I looked at some of the pictures that have been taken through his life. So we're going to start here. Oh, that doesn't work. Let's do that again. What's happening there?
You've got to tap on the slide and then it'll progress.
Yeah, I
There we
see.
go.
Thanks, Vince. So, Dick, your mom has a medallion, had a medallion. I guess you have it now.
Yeah, so my mom had a medallion that I thought I lost, but apparently I didn't. It was a Fairbanks medallion, and there's a home in Massachusetts where one of the families who came over on the Mayflower were the Fairbanks, and we're down related to them at some point.
So Dick can trace his lineage back to the Mayflower. He has quite well, actually, if you go to ancestry.com, he has one family member who's done a lot of work, your cousin Bobby, and you can trace yours back to
Chelsea.
Well, yeah, so Sharon actually does some real research with ancestry.com and figures out who her relatives are, and it's much harder for her as a Black woman and the child of slaves. At some point the history cuts off, but mine, being a little loosey-goosey, I went back to William the Conqueror, and then before the birth of Christ to the King of Thrace. I wouldn't bet on that.
Yeah, but anyway, William the Conqueror, that kind of is like, oh yeah, this theme. This is, and these guys that came over on the Mayflower, this was the first time in human history that they made an attempt. This was this experiment to not have a monarchy, to rule the way they wanted to rule. Of course, they wanted to have some slaves too, but let's not talk about that right now.
Yeah.
I can talk about we're
moving on from that.
Right, nothing to see there.
that little thing in the middle.
I can talk about what I actually do know about my ancestry.
Go ahead.
So my father's family were the man who came was a coal mine supervisor in Wales, in Cardiff, who was brought as an adult to Pennsylvania to supervise coal mines there, and then came to southern Minnesota to open up a dry goods store and a farm. My father's mother's side were the woman who came was a teenage teacher who came from Liverpool in England, was probably of Irish ancestry, and taught with her sister in southern Minnesota. On my mom's side, I know her father's side were Irish immigrants who had immigrated to Montreal around 1900, and then the family became well diggers in Western Canada, and then came down to the Dakotas, where they were cowboys, and then they went to Minnesota and became farmers. That line of family was also apparently they had the distinction of being the town drunk in one generation after another. So that's what I know about my actual family.
Excellent.
So Dick, are you 100% European?
I am Irish and Welsh, going back to the Neanderthals.
Okay.
He's not Neanderthal, and
my mom did it one time. She said she thought because of those Irishmen in Western Canada that we probably had Native American blood. And I looked at me and I thought, well, gee, I don't think so. And ancestry.com put that to bed completely.
yeah, he did his DNA test and was sad to find out that he basically was made up.
I never believed it, and she only said it once. It was like a thing.
But it was kind of surprising. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, our skin is. I mean,
you tan.
Some of our I tan, but some of our family are so white. You have to have sunglasses.
Yeah, like like this side of the chart over here.
Right.
Okay, so after the Mayflower and coming in from Canada and all that, Dick's family finally settled in Minneapolis area of Minnesota.
Oh, no, my parents
We
met
don't
at,
want to spend too much time on this, baby. We got a lot of slides to go through, but you can go ahead. You can talk.
my parents met at the University of Minnesota. One of them had grown up in northern Minnesota in Moose Lake, and my father had grown in southern Minnesota in Leroy, Minnesota. Do you want me to tell you what's going on there?
Okay, so these are Dick's parents. Here on the right, you see Dick's parents and Dick, he's firstborn. And on the left is his mom. Very attractive, brilliant couple, both had PhDs. I don't think they had PhDs before you were born.
No. So the picture on the left is us living in Boulder, Colorado, where my dad was getting his doctorate. The interesting story about that, we lived in that camper, and my mom and I were in it when it was turned over by a tornado.
Oh my God.
I have no memory of that, but
I'm just learning this. Okay, so this is the thing about being married to him. Stuff like that. Now with me, if he and I were, that would be the first thing I tell him. So I'm just learning this. We've been together almost 20 years now. Okay. So anyway, Dick's parents were lovely parents, and I had an opportunity to have a relationship with both of them, and I miss them. They both passed away in the past 10 years.
Sharon, I might say one thing, that if you have new stories coming from Dick that you haven't heard, you should count your lucky stars. My wife is so bored by the crap I tell her. We've narrowed it down to just numbers because I keep repeating the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah, I can't believe this. He's turned over in a tornado.
I have told you that story.
Never.
But you just yum, 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 yum.
But so now the rebel in him comes out. I know you guys have heard of Watergate, but you've probably never heard of Snowballgate. So Snowballgate, you saw this little cute fella here. Oh, we're gonna have to mute. We're gonna have to mute Uni. Okay, so you saw the little cute little guy. This guy, my husband, used to look kind of like this. This isn't Dick, but this is a young man doing what Dick liked to do: so throw snowballs.
Want me to tell it?
Tell the story of Snowballgate.
So when I was in first grade, my parents left me half of the year with my uncle in a farm in northern Minnesota, and half of the year with my dad's family in this little town of Leroy, Minnesota. And my grandfather was a very austere gentleman. I mean, he was a farmer, but he was also the relief town cop on Friday night. And the big thrill when I was a little kid was to go ride around with him. And it really his only job in this town that had no crime was to go around with this key thing to all the stores. And you had a key that he would insert to show that he'd checked to make sure the doors were locked. But one time I was walking home from school on a bitterly cold day with lots of snow. And I was there with a buddy, and I saw my dad driving his car that looked quite a bit like that, my granddad. And I hit the side of his car with an icy snowball. And I saw him look around, and he had a very stern look, and I ducked down and then had this little town. I had to sneak around all the little alleys for 2 hours till I got home. And I was so cold. My grandmother took me up and climbed in bed with me and wrapped me in her arms because and I never owned up. There's many things that I never
owned up to.
No.
Apparently your grandfather was trying to find out.
He was driving up and down the streets, and there weren't that many streets in Leroy, Minnesota.
I love this story. I have him tell me this story every once in a while because it just makes me laugh. This little kid has a police officer driving up and down the street looking for him, and it was his own grandson. Grandson, and he never knew it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So now this over here is John Wright. This is not an actual picture of Dick and his best friend, John, but John Wright was Dick's best friend. So you want to talk about John, and why do I have a swimming pool there?
Yeah, okay. I can do that. So, Sharon and I, because we're this mixed race couple and because of the work we do with LA Progressive and ACLU, racism and how people come to be racist or not racist is a frequent topic of conversation. And I don't necessarily know why I'm exactly the way I am. But one thing I ping on is when I lived in the farthest out suburbs of Minneapolis, which are white people as far into the horizon as you can imagine, except kitty corner across from me was the Wright family. They had actually owned that whole area as farmers and then got wealthy selling it off to developers. And their oldest son, John Wright, was a year or two older than me, but we played 10,000 hours of basketball in his driveway and 5,000 hours of baseball around the corner at Forest Elementary School. And he was my friend, but he was more kind of my idol. I mean, he was as straight as arrow as you can imagine. He lifted weights, he was a chess champion, he skipped a grade in school. And I really kind of modeled myself after him. And that's why a lot of times I say that what's wrong with America is we live so separately, we don't know each other. And I was blessed to know John. She has the swimming pool up there because the Wright family suffered racism. Uh, they and they were a strong family. They went to the local swimming hole in a lake in Minnesota. The swimming pools are in lakes by and large, and they were turned away. And they sued the owners of that lot. But John and I would take our bicycles and drive all the way from the suburbs, ride all the way 10, 15 miles to the public pool in the Black neighborhood in North Minneapolis and back. At the time, I didn't think too much about it because there weren't any other swimming pools. But I realize now that that was really the only place John felt comfortable. And I think that was part of my formative thing. I mean, I also make the joke that my first kiss was with the girl who lived down the street.
She's not in here. No mention of her. He had no other women in his lives.
She was my girlfriend for about 45 minutes when I was 14. Her name was Cookie Vargas, and she gave me my first kiss, and my toes are still kind of crinkled up.
Wait a second. All right, moving
And your
on.
first hickey.
See here, moving on.
But I think so. When I went to New York, I mean, I think that
We're not in New York yet.
Okay. Oh, well, okay. So this was another aspect. I was active in a thing called Methodist Youth Fellowship. My dad for his third job, he was a high school teacher at this point in my life, a music teacher. He was an Army Reserve officer, a colonel eventually. And for his third job, because he had a wife and 4 kids, was to be a choir director, even though, in fact, none of us were very religious, but he was a good choir. He loved choir directing. He'd grown up as a musician. And with the Methodist Youth Fellowship at about 13 and 14, about that years, we went around to neighborhoods in the suburbs of Minneapolis and knocked on doors to raise funds for the Freedom Riders. And that was kind of an interesting experience because occasionally some people would give some money and some people would chase me right off the lawn.
And how old were you?
13 or 14. And that was another kind of formative thing. And so my family, I think my family was clued into racism. My dad taught in a inner city school in North Minneapolis, which wasn't the most violent place back then. But I saw him associating with other Black teachers and having Black students. And that sort of helped form who I am.
And so he said that, so you saw that Dick was an only child for about the first 7 years of his life.
Right.
And then these little ones came along. And this is Dick, Dave, Doug, and Don. Dick, Dave, Doug, and Don.
We were the 4D brothers.
Yes, the 4 Ds.
We even eventually had a company called the 4D Brothers for a while, renovating apartments in Inglewood.
But look at Dick. Doesn't he look so conservative and straight-laced?
Dick, how old were you here? You're almost as tall as your father.
Well, let's see. So Donnie looks like what would he be? 4 or 5?
Yeah,
And I'm 10 years older than him, so I would be 14 or 15.
yeah. So
Wow.
I'm the baby's age. Donnie and I are the same age.
And unfortunately, 2 of those brothers have passed away, and the little one, Don, is a professor of.
You have an opportunity because more stuff comes up.
If I'd known about this in advance, I'd know when
No,
to talk and
you don't
when
get
not
to
to
know.
talk.
You don't get to know. So now what am I showing this here? 17-year-old moves from
Oh, yeah,
this to this.
Yeah, so right. So at 17, I got a full ride scholarship to Columbia University, and I went to New York, and it was a pretty exciting time. In truth, I was intellectually probably well prepared for it because I was so shy. I read every book on the west side of Minneapolis. But emotionally, I really wasn't prepared for it, and I was kind of overawed. I had a wonderful time in some respects and a crappy time in other respects. After I came back from the Army, I joined the rugby team and played rugby for 10 years. And me and my oldest of my brothers, Dave, that was kind of a central part of our life. In fact, he stayed with rugby for another 40 years.
Dick, how did you keep your eyebrows? Every rugby player I know, hey, they've lost most of their eyebrows on both sides.
I did actually, I do have cauliflower ears from playing rugby. Well, I was also on the wrestling team at Columbia and in high school, and I played, if you can believe it, I played lightweight football as a freshman and sophomore at Columbia. 150-pound football. That was some years ago.
Yes, for all of us.
Oh my God, that's us. That's me in the middle with I don't remember their
Isn't it
names.
cute?
Tommy Hurley on the right. That we got Lloyd's of London wanted to spread rugby in the United States, so they took the Columbia rugby team and paid for our way for a trip through Ireland, Wales, England, Paris. Just a wonderful time.
Jeez.
It was very cool.
Sweetheart, tell them about when you played rugby with the guys. It was, I don't know if it was Ireland or Scotland, and they were men and they had come home from
Well, I mean, yeah, so the whole tour was kind of poorly arranged in some senses. We were mostly football players who had read a book about rugby and knew some of the rules and mostly played it like football players, which is not the way to play rugby, because rugby is like more like soccer. You have to play the whole 60 minutes or 90 minutes. There's no substitutions. So there's no point in doing the big thing where running a guy down and driving him into the ground, because you do that 2 or 3 times and then you're done for the day. So anyway, the first game in Ireland was against a bunch of high school kids. Little kids, they knew rugby, but Jesus Christ, they were scared of us because we were twice as big as them. And then we went to we went to Neath in Wales, and these miners came up out of the mine, the coal mine, and they didn't look too happy about any part of it, the mining or the playing rugby, and they're still kicking our ass. And 50 years later, Jesus. And then we went to England and played a bunch of sailors coming on British Navy sailors coming off their boat, and they were out of shape, and we clobbered them. And then we went to Paris and played one of the best rugby teams in the world, the University of Paris team, and they delighted in just running up to score on us and shouting at us in French. But it was a wonderful time. I mean, it was the only time I've been in Paris, which was cool.
Okay, so then we have this 1968.
This was less fun than Paris.
Sure it was. And you ended up down here.
Mekong Delta. Yeah, so I right. So as I said, I wasn't really emotionally prepared for college. And as kind of a desperation thing, I joined the Army. I volunteered for the draft. They seemed to be more than happy to take me. And it was actually a good experience in some sense, in that I learned some good things about myself. I learned that honest to God, I was kind of cool under fire. I could push my emotions down and deal with what was going on. It probably gave me an anti-authoritarian attitude. I served in the Mekong Delta as a combat soldier, as an infantry soldier. a platoon sergeant and a squad leader. And ultimately I was wounded in a rice paddy that looked something like that top picture, in exactly the same place on my lower right leg where my dad had been wounded in World War II, crossing I think the Meuse River, going from Belgium into Great Britain. He led a company of combat engineers. They were putting what's called a Bailey Bridge so the tanks could roll into Germany, and they were shelled, and he got wounded right in his calf, and I was wounded in the same thing, which in an odd way kind of brought us together because we at times had some divisions and so forth.
Did somebody have a question? So I just want to speak briefly about this picture here. So as you know, Dick and I have been together now for 19 years. And for 14 of the 19 years, I didn't have these images in my head. I just had sort of the couple of sentences that he told me that he was wounded. I could see, I've seen his wound. So it's obvious he was wounded. I had no idea until recently that he was wounded and a helicopter came to get him. But as he was trying to get to the helicopter, they had to abandon him and leave him there on the battlefield or battle swamp or whatever you call this. And they didn't come back for
a couple hours. We had to engage in a firefight.
Not your time. Wait. A couple of hours. He has a leg that doesn't work. He's left abandoned, and then he's still in a firefight for 2 hours. This is the way that Dick tells stories. I don't find out this part about him being in a firefight for 2 hours wounded. The helicopter then had to come back.
You got part of it wrong. There's this thing called adrenaline. The leg worked well enough. And so we had a firefight, and I was.
See how he's so nonchalant about these things? It amazes me.
Well, so the story is, so the helicopter landed in a medevac hospital in a place called Dongtam, which actually wasn't far from where I was wounded, and right. So I hopped in. I got out of the helicopter. I hopped in on my one good leg. I didn't need him to get me a stretcher, and I gave the pistol I had to a company clerk, and the doctor ultimately said, you got $1 million wound, son. And what do you mean $1 million wound?
You're going home.
Yeah, you're not going to lose a leg, and you're going home. And so that was pretty cool. But then he asked me if I wanted to be put out or have a local anesthetic, and I looked up on the wall. It didn't look exactly like it on the left, but it looked a lot like it. There was an array of orthopedic saws there.
Rough carpentry.
Yes, and I said no. I'll just put the leg to sleep. Which then the piece of shrapnel, which looked like a nickel, was stuck right in the middle of my fibula, and he had to yank and pull, and I'm hanging on to the thing, and he's pulling me off, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I should have had him put me out.
So anyway, I searched around the internet and found pictures that I thought might resemble Dick's experience. You see his feet there, although this does look like a black man.
But you can see in the picture on the right that that fella must have been much more wounded than I was. I had a single doctor and a male nurse there, and I was sort of their easy shift for the night.
Were your parents still in Minneapolis at that point?
My parents were wonderful people who were somewhat mismatched, and when I came home from Vietnam, I was informed that they'd decided to get divorced, and my mom had moved out to Los Angeles, and my dad was still in LA with my three brothers.
Still in Minneapolis.
Yeah, with my three brothers. So they got divorced then.
And were you still in contact with John?
John Wright.
John Wright, no. John Wright became an esteemed professor of African American Studies and English at the University of Minnesota. Eventually headed the department. When I came home, for the most part, I got a warm welcome and a welcome home party. 3 people spun on their heels and turned their back to me. I mean, Christ, it was 1969. There was a lot of anti-war. A young fellow who had been on the wrestling team with me spun on his heels. My best buddy in New York City, I thought he was my best buddy, hung up the phone on me. And John Wright just gave me a cold stare and walked away. So all I can say to all 3 of them is, fuck you.
That's that other part of Dick. Oh,
Okay.
so then after rehabilitation, he ended up still
Well, there's
having.
more to that. Let me say there's more to that. I mean, I was not in favor of Vietnam. I went there out of desperation because I was not doing well in life, and I certainly, I saw as soon as I got there that the story that we were doing something good for the people of Vietnam was a load of bullshit, and it helped inform my disbelief in what I'm told from folks who put themselves on high. And I came home and protested against the war in Vietnam, and then on the other hand, it gave me the experience at that point in my life. I got to associate with people that I typically wouldn't have associated with. I kind of was there because I'd chosen to be there to some extent. Most of the guys around me, they were there because they had no option. They didn't have any strong family behind them. They didn't have any education. They were just pawns and I got to see, this is kind of how the world works. And sort of gave me a heart for other people who are in a bad situation.
You have a lot in common with Ron Kovic.
Yeah, we've met him.
I've interviewed Ron Kovic and got to know him, and yes, he's a powerful voice, and we wrote a wonderful. I'll share that piece. I'll share that article.
Please do.
Okay, so now we're back in Minnesota. Minnesota can't beat that weather. This is Dick on his way to University of Minnesota.
Yeah, so I came back after Vietnam, and ultimately I graduated on the 10-year plan from the University of Minnesota with a
year.
Yeah, well, I had some adventures. I had to drive a cab for a while in New York, and
tell them about your first day of cab driving.
So on that rugby team, a bunch of us got this idea. A New Yorker said a good way to make some money is to drive cabs, and so 3 or 4 of us did that. We signed up and we drove. And that actually was a wonderful way at the time. I could, in 1972 or whatever it was, I could make $100 a night in tips and would get $40 in pay, $140 for, and I would do that 2 or 3 nights a week while I was in school. That floated my boat plus the GI Bill. The first night I drove up to 96th Street and Broadway, which is a main subway outlet. And I let out this older lady who had engaged me, and two black kids hopped in the back. And it was my first night driving, and I made several stupid mistakes. First of all, me as a white guy dressed in jeans, I would not be getting a cab at 96th Street. I'd be getting on the subway. And then I let these 2 young men take me up to Harlem, and anyway, the next thing I know, on my left, I'm looking down the barrel of a gun, and on the right, I'm looking at a knife. Fortunately, I'd just been to Vietnam, and it didn't, it's like, can I keep my license? So then they dashed off with the money that I had. And I look up in the mirror and I see these 3 long-haired hippies running down the street with great big guns in their hand. I said, oh, Jesus Christ, this is not the good deal that I thought it was. And it turned out that, and so the first one trips on a manhole cover and his gun goes skittering under my cab. And I'm just, Let me out of here. Turns out they were undercover cops, and they've
Yeah.
been watching me the whole way make these mistakes. I ran a light, and anyway, so what I did is I went down to the police station, looked at pictures, said, I didn't see any faces. All I saw was the barrel of that gun. And then I went home and borrowed $5 worth of change and continued driving that night, because I knew if I stopped, I'd never do it.
Never go back.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that crazy? That's his first night of driving a cab. Again, if I had gone on a date with him and I had those stories, they would have come out the first time. It took years for me to find out about that. Now, I'm bringing this map up because it shows you where Columbia University is. And 5 miles from Columbia University is where my grandmother's house is. And it's where I spent half my time. And this is where I lived, which is 10 miles from Columbia University. I only bring that up to say that all the while when Dick was at Columbia, I was either here or here.
Yeah, it would have been wonderful if we'd gotten together, except she would have been 12.
8.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That was the only problem. He probably wouldn't have found me attractive. I was 8. So, but that was his cab driver experience. So
Did you lose your scholarship when you went to Vietnam? Is that what happened?
I did not. No, I didn't lose it.
he came back.
And college wasn't that expensive then. I gained the GI Bill. No, I still had it.
But yeah,
Okay, because you didn't sound like you were working during the first year, but after that you had to work.
No, I did work. They got me
okay.
a job. I was a waiter in a fancy pants restaurant on campus where the rich kids came to eat. And well, it was nice though. It was in the same building where I lived. And at the end of the evening, I get a great big piece of prime rib. I liked it. It was cool.
and guess who else was there? Attorney General.
Oh, Billy Barr, my friend Billy Barr.
Oh.
I knew him briefly, and he was as the same straight-laced prick he was then as he is now. I mean, this was when I met him, it was like 1971. Everybody were dressed at best like the 3 guys in this picture.
You guys are dressed up.
And he would always have a little sports coat and a tie, and he'd be going down to his exclusive fraternity where only, it cost $10,000 a year to join. So.
Okay, so we got through Vietnam. I learned about the helicopter, the leg. He went on to Fort Dix and to Kentucky.
Fort Knox. I was after I was wounded, because I'd heard my parents had gotten divorced. They told me, and my mom was living in LA, and my dad was still in Minneapolis. To be even-handed, when the medical people asked me what hospital I wanted to go to recover, I said, well, how about between those? So they sent me to Denver, where I knew nobody at all.
Yeah.
They put me on, and they put me on the amputee ward because I had an orthopedic wound. And so there I was with all my limbs, and 50 guys who had lost 1 leg, 1 arm. 2 or 3 of them had lost 3 limbs. A damn grim place.
And where did this military theme in your life begin? I wonder.
Well, so my dad, he became this, or he was, he was this gentle soul, this long-haired musician, but he was drafted early. He was drafted early in World War II in 1940, even long before we got involved. And he started off in the Army band, but then he wanted to contribute in a bigger way. So he went to OCA, Officer Candidate School, and he served in combat. He was kept in the Army afterwards because he was no doubt a very strong person. A moral person. He was and he considered making the military a career, except he thought in peacetime Army, all the officers did was drink in the officers club, and he'd had enough of that. But he stayed in the Army Reserves for 30 years and was a colonel. He was Inspector General. He went around to reserve units in the upper Midwest and made sure they had all their files in order. you know, and so there he has my little brothers in his U.S. Army outfits.
So the flag that you can see above my head is from when Dick's dad died, and he's buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So Dick's three brothers, if you look at the one all the way on the left, that's Don. He had other ideas. He now is a professor. He's a biological scientist, has a PhD in one of the biological sciences and teaches at University of Nevada. But he certainly was not down with this whole Army theme.
Well, none of my brothers
None.
followed up on that. You know, I sort of put the kibosh on that.
Okay,
idea.
so we're through with Minnesota. He went on, he got his degree. And then why do I have this picture here?
So right at the end of my college career in Minnesota, I was getting the GI Bill, and I also got a job managing a co-ed house. It was a Pillsbury mansion, and I happened to form a liaison with one of the residents, and she was going to Georgetown Law, so I followed her to Washington,
I don't want to hear about these women. I'm asking about the Dubliner.
Hey, you put it up there.
So I want to know about the doughboy. If you were in the Pillsbury house, I want to know what the doughboy was doing.
Making dough.
Yes.
So down the street from Georgetown Law is this bar called the Dubliner, a very Irish bar, and she got me a job there, and I spent some months as a bartender there, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and it fueled my I would say incipient alcoholism, but by that time it was probably roaring alcoholism, and it was just the right place for me.
Right. But the part that I want you to talk about is the people who would come in and how you would hear about what was going on in Congress and Bill Clinton and stories.
Well, that's true. I mean, the clients were mostly Irish Americans and some Irish, but who worked on Capitol Hill, and they would have all the inside gossip on stuff. I don't know what well, so I then ended up owning a different bar on Capitol Hill, and one of the customers who came in occasionally was her name Genevieve Flowers. And she would come in and complain that the governor hadn't been to see her for a while. Clinton, she was Clinton's girlfriend in town, and she was kind of a sad case. But she would get up on the bar and dance until we'd make her get down.
He has so much interesting stories, but eventually he had to.
How old were you during this period?
How old were you?
I was probably late 20s.
Okay.
So.
Right. So one thing I didn't mention, I was going to add some bullets that Dick did. I am Dick's third wife, and his second wife, Irene, and I became friends. And Irene passed away, but his first wife passed away too. Do you want to?
So yeah, so Peggy McClung was her name, and she was a customer in one of those bars and came and kind of rescued me in some sense, pulled me out and helped me out. She was a lovely young person who was working. Her dad worked for the Department of Agriculture, and she worked for some foundation in DC, and so we got together, and then a couple of years later we got married, and then we moved out to Los Angeles to be part of my brother's company renovating apartments. But she developed an aneurysm in the center of her brain that killed her.
So Dick has some sad stuff too. So some of that stuff I didn't incorporate, but I thought that leaving Washington and Los Angeles, that we should mention that. And then this little thing happened.
Yeah. Well, so then well, actually what happened, so I didn't deal with Peggy's death very well. I used it as another excuse to dive deeper into a bottle of bourbon for a year. And then I got sober and ran a halfway house that I assume you're going to get to.
No, I didn't put any AA stuff because you tell me that that's supposed to be anonymous. So I just
Yeah,
let
press, radio, and film. You're not giving this to the Times, are you?
We're recording it. Okay.
Oh, well,
But I
that's-
thought I let you say it. You'd be
Yeah.
the one to say it.
Yeah, so I got sober in 1981. I went to a treatment center up in Minnesota, and I came back, and it was a turning point in my life. I mean, it saved my life. I got sober once I put the bottle down, the drinking part was easy, but then I had to deal with who I was, and I had a lot of regrets. I said that I was able to push my emotions down in Vietnam. Well, I pushed my emotions down in Minneapolis and New York, and I just, everything was all packed down, and I hadn't really talked about how I felt. I hadn't really talked to anybody how I felt about Peggy's death, and kind of my sense that I'd let her down and let my parents down, and and AA allowed me to deal with it. Also, eventually in AA, I was able to, rather than run from the issue of being so terribly shy, I was able to face it in some sense. And then I got involved. I went to, like at 30 days sober, I went with this buddy down the street to yet another AA meeting. Geez, I was going to them every day. But this one is in a restaurant called Eat at Joe's in Redondo Beach. And it turned out it wasn't an AA meeting. It was a bunch of AA members who wanted to start a halfway house. I mean, the traditional way in AA is, if a newcomer comes, somebody will take, if they need it, they'll come and take it and put them on the couch for a while and tell it, for a month until they can get on their feet. But this was at the beginning of the crack epidemic, and there weren't enough couches to go around. So I got in this group of mostly older men and a couple women who wanted to start a halfway house. I had never been in a halfway house. I was 30 days sober, didn't really know anything about AA, but I was half their age and twice as strong, and I had a degree in English. So I got in charge of ashtrays, chairs, and minutes. And as you see, minutes, I still do minutes. It was a way I could contribute, but that became like a 20-year part of my life. And I ultimately, when we moved it to a much bigger building in Torrance, I took over and ran it. And it was one of the proudest things I did. I did a really good job of setting up this 20-bed halfway house for alcoholics. I opened it up to addicts because it was 84, 85, 86, really the center of the crack epidemic. And it had started right on the beach in all white Manhattan Beach. But when we moved to Torrance, I made sure it was a third Latino and a third Black and a third white, roughly. I also, and that was a great pride of mine. And as I was ending that, I noticed that in the meeting after the meeting, frequently we'd have this AA meeting, and afterwards you go out to a restaurant and you have a social time. And I noticed that 4 or 5 weeks in a row, there was this blonde Swedish woman at my elbow, and one thing or another, she became my wife. We tried, and we had a 19-year marriage, and the first half of it was lovely and wonderful. We tried, we moved heaven and earth to have a child, including spending a lot of money on in vitro fertilization and other kinds of things. And then we discovered this thing called adoption, and you see the result of that wonderful decision, my daughter, Linnea, and that's her. We adopted her at birth. She is now living down in Torrance still. She has a degree in biology. She works for us on LA Progressive. We're still trying to get her into the next stage in her career. She's a lovely person and kind of along with Sharon, the light of my life.
And now
Henry. Okay, so since the first adoption had gone so well, really Irene wanted to have a second child. I thought, at our age, that we'd done enough, but she really insisted. So we foster adopted a little boy named Henry. Actually, his name was Emmanuel. We were going to rename him for Irene's father. And he lived with us for a year and a half or so. And then one day I came home, and Irene called me home and told me, for who knows what reason, the marriage was over, and that she'd called the family services people to take Henry back. And that was a real low point.
Yeah, so I met Dick probably maybe 3 months after this, because
No.
that's I don't
A year.
a year. Okay, because I wasn't in Dick's life when this happened, but I met him after this, and he was no longer living with Irene. And one of the first things he did tell me about Henry, and asked me if I would be willing to help him find Henry.
Oh, that's right.
So this has been a sore point. We did not find Henry. We don't know where Henry is, and we don't know Henry's name anymore. And Henry probably now would be about 22.
Yeah.
Oh, that's sad.
It's very sad. There's a whole backstory about transracial adoption. And there was a social worker. The reason that they took Henry away so quickly was partly because of the transracial adoption, and because the social worker who was assigned to this case did not support, she was a Black woman, and she didn't support transracial adoption. She wasn't happy that they already had Nia, and she did not believe that they should have had Henry.
Well, you're extrapolating that.
I am.
She never said any of that. It is also true that Irene was developing arthritis, and Henry was a lovely little boy, but Nia had been God's gift to a family, the nicest, easiest going child. Henry also had this thing that I had in Vietnam called adrenaline. He ran everywhere. He was a lot of work. I didn't, and I think he wore Irene out, and Irene didn't ultimately bond with him. I did, but she didn't, and that was a part of it as well.
Yeah. So Nia came into my life when she was 8 years old, and we have a lot of pictures of us strangling her.
It's our family picture.
It's our family picture.
At each stage in her life.
Yeah. And this picture here on the left, Dick, look at this. That's Sylvia. I never even noticed that. Sylvia
Where is
Moore.
it? You know,
I have no idea where it is, but that's Sylvia Moore in the back. I just noticed that today. So we've been very happy together as a family, and I've been Nia's stepmom since she was 8 years old. And so these are the many faces of Dick since now I came in. Yeah, since I came into his life, and we became the LA Progressive. And so we're joined at the hip, and he's now into a very multiracial, multinational family. On the right, far right, you guys have met my son. That's his wife, Yoko. Christmas time.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the point, but I mean, we didn't get together to have an interracial marriage. We got together because
for interracial sex.
Yes.
Well,
it's being recorded. That's not why.
I was getting there. So how we got together? We met through online dating, and she was actually not into online dating. She'd done it for a long time. She'd been single for a long time, but she wanted to show her younger sister, who was a model, beautiful, but was home. They were living together, and they were home, and she wanted to show her the ropes on online dating. And so she put up a minimal profile. I had gotten a free month of online dating, and one in the summer and one in the winter, and I was done with it. I'd had 12 nice little lunches that I paid for that went no place, and I could tell they weren't going any place 3 minutes into it. But the last one, I sent a message to her, and then I pinged her because, hey, all you say you want on your profile is an older guy who likes to read and who's into politics. Here I am. Why are you not responding? And And I embarrassed her.
He did.
And she
He embarrassed him.
responded. She gave me a phone number. The nicest thing in the world. I called her up and I could tell she was nervous.
Yeah, because I'd had it with these guys.
You know, so I thought, oh, well, I mean, she'd made this vow that she was never going to date a white guy, but I didn't know that for later. So the reason, on a Sunday morning in Old Pasadena, I'm on the corner and what's the name of that restaurant? Twin Palms.
Mhm.
And here's this hot number walking down the street who'd gone to the trouble of putting on somewhat clean jeans and a sweatshirt because she was actually coming from work. I said, well, you know,
On a Saturday,
she's not way into this, but, and then we had a 10-hour date. It included a movie. The Twin Palms was too busy, so we went to this lovely romantic place called La Luna Negra.
Oh, yes.
And a walk in the park and some ice cream and some coffee and a movie, Chicago. And you know, I never in my life had a 10-hour date, you know. So she says she wasn't sold on anything. I was sold by the time we got to La Luna Negra, 45 minutes into it. I said, "There's something going on here."
Well, they don't want to hear all that. So these are just backup pictures showing.
How do you know they don't want to hear it?
Because it's boring.
Nobody's clicked their screen off.
Okay, so these are pictures of Dick's family from the
Right.
60s. These are his two brothers over on the right. Don with the yellow shirt on and glasses, and Dave, who passed away prematurely before either one of them made it to 60, which was very difficult because they were very close. The four here are the four of them actually shortly before they passed away, along with Dick's dad. 4 Ds. And I like this picture on the right because it makes me look skinny. I love to stand next to Dave.
So that's the first place we lived together, down in Torrance.
Yeah, that's when Dick and I first got together. And his brothers and I.
So who are the other guys on the right?
They're all his brothers. There's 4 of them, and his dad. So on the right, that's with me in the center. That's Dave with the orange shirt on. That's Dick behind Dave. That's Dick's father's name is Dave, and Dick's other brother Doug.
Doug. Okay.
Doug. Yeah.
And that's
Hey,
Don.
Sharon, allow me one sexist trope. You are a hottie. Dick, you are so damn lucky.
Yeah.
That's
we
what
were
I thought
happy.
when she was walking down the street. She said, "Oh my God."
Yeah, lucky you.
Yeah. Well, we're really happy together, and I think it's unusual that we love each other more today than we did, in the early days, especially after spending a year and few months together in the pandemic. Literally sitting within a foot of each other 24/7. It's really been a blessing to have my guy, and that's how he started out. This is what he looks like now.
Well, that's a few years ago. That was at one of our
ACLU.
ACLU garden parties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before he got the Lyndon Baines Johnson hairdo,
Yeah.
the LBJ retirement hair.
Yeah, I had some other images that I was going to throw in about one story about the convention. We went to the Democratic State Convention, and we're in this huge ballroom with about maybe 2,000 people. You know how those state conventions are. And this young woman comes winding her way through we're seated at these like round tables with maybe 10 people at each table. It's a packed room. And a woman comes winding her way through the tables. I believe Elizabeth Warren was speaking. Dick and I are sitting listening, and she just makes a beeline to Dick and bends over and whispers something in his ear. And then Dick stands up, and almost immediately after she whispers this something in his ear, a huge man, bigger than Dick, is like coming after this girl. And what she said to him was, "Please help me." What the woman said to Dick is, "Please help me. This man is following me and won't leave me alone." And so I see this guy, and I tell the girl, "Get behind me." And Dick stops him. Dick stands up and stops this man and says, what do you want? What are you doing? And the man says, "She's taking pictures of me." And Dick says, leave her alone. And the man just disregards Dick and makes a motion coming towards me and this girl. And Dick says, "Oh, no, you won't." And that's when I saw Vietnam Dick.
No, that was the Dubliner Dick.
Oh, Dublin.
That was when I had to toss a lot of guys out of that place. I was good at that kind of stuff. So I grabbed him by the neck and ran him up against the wall. And
This is true.
he was surprised.
He was surprised, and he didn't know how to fight. And he was fighting Dick like this. But I was nervous because when Dick got him up against the wall, the man's face started to turn colors. And so people called the police, and the police came, and they were taking Dick. But I convinced them, other people convinced them that the other guy was a problem. But we did have to leave the convention. And we left.
We didn't have to leave. We chose to leave. What am I going to do? Walk back in front of 3,000 people after?
I know.
No.
But when we left, I told Dick, I said, "Oh my God, I didn't know you were like that. And now I'm really scared because this guy, we don't know, he could have a gun." So we just left. We left Sacramento. We came home. So there's several stories like that. I didn't include any of our stories around water. But I'll leave it there. Well, I will say that we were stranded at sea once and had to be rescued.
Well, I'll tell you one story. So we were in Florida at a place called the 10,000 Islands in the Everglades. And it's these tiny little mangrove islands. And so we rented a canoe and rowed and paddled across this river a couple hundred yards and went to a place called Sandfly Island that was supposed to be an interesting place.